The moving truck hadn't even finished backing out of my new driveway when I saw them. 3 men in polos and khakis, clipboards tucked under their arms, marching toward me like they owned the whole neighborhood. Their steps were heavy with arrogance, and their faces wore that smug expression of people who think rules bend in their favor. I didn't even know their names yet, but I already knew the type. HOA board members. "Welcome to the neighborhood," one of them said, though his tone was anything but warm. He didn't even glance at my boxes stacked by the porch. Instead, his eyes darted over my shoulder, toward the lake. My lake. "We'll need to go over the usage rules," another added, pulling out his clipboard like he was about to issue me a ticket. "That water belongs to the community, and as a homeowner, you'll be required to pay annual lake fees plus dock maintenance." I almost laughed. They had no idea. They thought they were giving me a warning, but really, they were about to walk into the biggest mistake of their lives. Because what they didn't know was written plain as day in my deed. That sparkling stretch of water? It wasn't theirs. It wasn't the HOA's, it wasn't community property, it was mine. And not just the water, the docks, the slips, the very structures their members had been using for years like they owned them. I didn't say a word that first day. I just nodded politely, letting them ramble on about fees and rules and permits. Let them think they had me cornered. What they didn't know was that by storming onto my property that day, they'd awakened a storm of their own. One that would unravel everything they thought they controlled, shatter their grip on the neighborhood, and leave their authority in ruins. And it all started right there, on my driveway, surrounded by cardboard boxes, with 3 strangers trying to tell me my lake belonged to them. Before we go on, hit subscribe, so stories like this reach you first. When I bought the property, I wasn't looking for a fight. Truth be told, I'd been searching for peace. After years of city noise and endless stress, the lakefront house felt like a sanctuary, an escape tucked behind tall trees, with water so still it mirrored the sky. It was supposed to be my place to breathe, to finally slow down. The realtor had been clear about one thing. The lake was mine. The deed spelled it out in black and white, including the shoreline and the docks that stretched into the water. She even laughed as she told me how the previous owner had enjoyed watching the HOA squirm whenever they tried to enforce rules over what they didn't own. I figured those were just stories, funny little anecdotes that wouldn't concern me. I was wrong. The HOA was infamous in the neighborhood, though I didn't know that yet. They had a reputation for stepping beyond their boundaries, dictating the color of people's shutters, measuring grass blades with rulers, even threatening fines for kids' bicycles left on porches. Residents whispered about them but rarely pushed back. Fear kept people in line. So when they saw me unload my furniture and spotted the lake behind my house, they assumed I'd be just another pushover. They thought they could bark their rules, slap on some fees, and I'd cave like everyone else. But unlike the other homeowners, I held the one thing they desperately wanted: control of the water. At first, I tried to blend in. I introduced myself to a few neighbors, smiled at the kids riding bikes, waved when cars slowed as they passed my house. People were friendly enough, but I noticed the way their eyes flickered toward the lake. It wasn't admiration, it was expectation. They looked at me as though I were just the gatekeeper to something they believed belonged to them. Within the first week, the letters started showing up. Neatly typed notices with HOA letterhead, demanding payments for community lake upkeep and threatening penalties for unregistered dock usage. I'd chuckle each time I opened one, sliding the papers into a folder I'd labeled evidence. What struck me most wasn't their boldness, it was their confidence. These people genuinely believed they could bully me into handing over rights that weren't theirs. They'd done it for years, convincing the whole neighborhood the docks and slips fell under their jurisdiction. People had been paying thousands in fees, completely unaware the HOA had no claim. That was the moment I realized my peaceful lake house was about to become ground zero for a war. Not the kind fought with fists, but with truth, paperwork, and leverage. And the best part? They had no idea they were already standing on my battlefield. The HOA didn't waste time. By the second week, they were on my porch again, this time with a formal notice. The president, A man named Gary with a red face and the posture of someone who'd spent his life bossing around cashiers and waiters waved the paper like it was holy scripture. "This outlines your obligations to the community," he said, shoving it at me. "You owe $5,000 annually for lake maintenance and dock management. Late fees apply after 30 days. I studied his smug expression, then glanced at the document. It was official-looking, sure. Headers, bold text, even a signature line. But it had one fatal flaw, not a single shred of legal ground. I tucked it into my evidence folder without a word. A few days later, the harassment escalated. I came home to find a bright orange sticker slapped across my mailbox. Violation, unauthorized use of community property. My so-called crime? Sitting on my own dock with a cup of coffee. Neighbors began whispering too. At the grocery store, an older woman leaned in and said, "Don't cross the HOA. They'll make your life miserable." Another confessed she'd been paying hundreds every year for a dock permit, even though she never once saw improvements. The pattern was clear: intimidation, manipulation, control. They thrived on fear. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't afraid. I was patient. Instead of fighting back immediately, I started gathering proof. Every letter, every bogus fine, every time they trespassed on my property, I documented it all. I even installed cameras by the docks, catching board members trying to inspect their slips late at night. Meanwhile, I let them dig their own hole. They sent more fines, posted notices, even threatened legal action if I didn't comply. I smiled through it all, because each new attempt only tightened the noose they were unknowingly slipping around their own necks. What they thought was a show of dominance was, in reality, evidence piling higher and higher in my favor. And soon, I would drop it all on them in one devastating move, the kind that would shatter their false authority and make the entire neighborhood realize who really controlled the lake. It all came to a head on a Saturday morning, just as summer was kicking off. The HOA had plastered the neighborhood with flyers advertising their annual community lake day. They promised music, food, and boating fun for the whole family. The bold letters read, "Dock access permits required, available through HOA office only." I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching car after car roll in. Families carried coolers and fishing poles, kids trailed behind with inflatable tubes, and the HOA board members strutted around like kings, collecting wristbands at the entrance to the docks. They had no idea what was about to happen. At noon sharp, I walked down to the docks, deed folder tucked under my arm. Gary, the president, spotted me immediately. His face flushed red as he puffed up his chest. "You can't be here without a permit," he barked, holding up his clipboard. "You're in violation." "Actually," I said calmly, "I'm the only one here who can be here." Confusion rippled through the crowd. Neighbors glanced at each other, whispering. I opened the folder and pulled out the paperwork. The deed, the lake survey, the dock titles. I held them high so everyone could see. "This lake," I said, my voice steady, "and every dock attached to it belongs to me. Not the HOA, not the board, me," gasps. Spread through the crowd like wildfire. One man frowned. "But we've been paying dock fees for years." "Exactly," I cut in. "You've been paying thousands of dollars to people who never owned any of it. This entire event? This so-called Lake Day? They're hosting it on my property without my permission." Gary's face twisted with rage. "That's a lie. The HOA has controlled this lake for decades." "Don't listen to him!" But I was ready. I handed copies of the deed to the nearest families. They scanned the pages, their eyes widening as the truth sank in. More people gathered, reading for themselves. Murmurs turned into shouts. "You mean we've been scammed? All those fees for nothing? They threatened to fine me for fishing on water I already had access to." The crowd turned on the board members. Some parents demanded refunds on the spot. One man ripped off his wristband and threw it at Gary's feet. I let the chaos build for a moment before delivering the final blow. Effective immediately, all HOA access to these docks is revoked. "You want to fish here? Talk to me. You want to launch your boat? My permission only. The HOA has no authority here, and any further attempts to trespass will be met with legal action." Silence fell. Everyone stared at me, waiting for Gary's response. He sputtered, trying to regain control. You can't just— Yes, I can, I interrupted, pointing at the cameras mounted on my property. I have months of footage of you trespassing, harassing me, and issuing fake fines. Every letter you sent is filed with my lawyer. If you want to test me, go ahead. But know this, you won't just lose the lake. You'll lose the entire HOA. That broke him. Gary's bluster crumbled as neighbors closed in, demanding explanations. The once feared board members suddenly looked small, cornered, powerless. And standing on that dock, with the sun glinting off the water, I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about an entire neighborhood finally breaking free from years of manipulation. The HOA had stormed in thinking they could intimidate me. Instead, I had dismantled their empire in front of everyone. And they knew it. In the days that followed, the neighborhood was buzzing. For years, people had tiptoed around the HOA, too scared to question their authority. Now, after watching their leaders get publicly exposed, the fear was gone. The veil had been lifted, and what stood revealed was nothing more than a group of bullies hiding behind letterheads and clipboards. Neighbors began approaching me one by one, not with hostility but with relief. An older couple confessed they'd been paying dock fees for nearly a decade, even though they rarely used the water. A young family admitted they had considered moving because the constant fines and threats made them feel like prisoners in their own home. I thought I was the only one man said, shaking my hand. Turns out we were all being played. The HOA board tried to save face. They sent out a letter insisting that my claims were misinterpreted and that community rules still apply. But it was too late. Copies of my deed had already made the rounds, and dozens of residents had spoken to lawyers who confirmed the truth. The HOA had no legal claim over the lake or docks. And without the lake, their authority unraveled fast. People stopped paying the bogus fees. They ignored the board's threats. At the next community meeting, half the chairs sat empty, and the ones who did show up demanded answers. By the end of the month, 2 board members had resigned, and Gary himself went silent, avoiding eye contact whenever he drove past my house. As for me, I kept my promise. I didn't slam the gates shut on my neighbors. Families were still welcome to fish, swim, and boat, but only with my permission, not under the HOA's thumb. I posted clear rules: no late-night parties, no dumping trash, and absolutely no fake fees. It wasn't about control, it was about fairness. The change was immediate. Kids laughed on the shore again, parents relaxed on the docks without fear of fines, and the lake returned to what it was always meant to be, a place of peace. The tension that once hung over the neighborhood began to lift, replaced with something better: community. Sometimes I'd catch people giving me a nod of respect as they passed my house. Not because I was some hero, but because I stood up to the thing everyone else thought was untouchable. The HOA stormed in the day I moved, certain they could bully me into submission. Instead, their own arrogance exposed them. In trying to claim my lake, they lost everything they thought they controlled. And as I sat on my dock one evening, watching the sun dip below the water, I realized something. Peace doesn't come from hiding from bullies. It comes from standing up to them and showing everyone else that they never had the power in the first place.